Good morning. It is Monday, November 9th, and the start of a new weekly reading vlog. So as I mentioned as I was just wrapping up the last reading vlog, I'm about 100 pages into the Iron Jackal by Chris Wooding. So slow progress there, but I definitely hope to continue with that one and kind of put a little bit more of a priority on that one this week. I'm also listening to the audiobook of A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, and that's kind of a dark academia story, so I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the week. But I'm hoping to finish that soon. And then as far as my next audiobooks, there are a couple of things that I think I'm trying to decide between. There's Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, and then there's A Rebirth at the Gates by Saba Tahir, the third book in her Ember in the Ashes series. The fourth one in that series is coming out at the beginning of December, and so at some point this month I want to read the third one to get ready for that. So I'm probably going to decide between those two. So who knows what I'll end up being in the mood for, but I think those are going to be the next two that I target. A Deadly Education is the last one that I had checked out at the library that came through so far, or a hold that came through from the library, and I don't have any other that are about to come up. And so so I can turn to some of the other books that were on my TBR without needing to return them at a particular time. But I think I'll be deciding between those two, so I will let you know later in the week how A Deadly Education went and what I feel like reading next. So check in later. It is Thursday morning and I do have an update. I have finished A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I listened to this on audio from my library and I have super mixed feelings about this one, to be honest. I'm not quite sure. So this one follows Elle, and she is a student at the Skullomance school, and this is a school that doesn't have any teachers, which is super interesting. And it is a school designed to, in a sense, train students in different kinds of magic, and if you survive and are able to graduate, then hopefully you're more prepared to actually survive the outside world. And it's a super interesting world, and on the outside things are still super dangerous. There are still a bunch of different creatures that exist that try to target people with magic, and people kind of band together in different enclaves is what they're called. And so the hope is to do well enough in school that you can get a place in one of these enclaves that just kind of serve to help protect the people in that group. And so that's part of why people want to go to this school that's super dangerous. And ultimately, and it's an interesting building too, so I think one of the interesting things for me about this one was to learn the ways the school works and how the school interacts with the students, and that's part of how they learn, in a sense, the creatures that are in this school that are constantly trying to get at the students and make life dangerous for them even while they're at the school, let alone as they're graduating. So when you graduate, essentially the gates open to the graduation hall, and if you can get out, you have graduated. And so some of the creatures just kind of stick around the graduation hall and wait for their yearly feast on the people who are trying to graduate and get out. So anyway, it's a super interesting building, a super interesting school. There's a lot to learn about this world, which was part of the frustration with the first book. There's so much going on, there's so many different creatures, there's so many different things to learn, that the first book just kind of ended up being a bunch of exposition trying to tell you about this world, like mostly exposition. And there's some things going on as well, and the things that are going on, and the main character, you're in her head, so it's first person, you're in her head, and she's kind of describing to you what's going on, why they're reacting the way they do, how they try to protect themselves, and more information about the school and the world on the outside, to give you a sense of why they want to go to school and what they hope to achieve once they're outside and have graduated. But the main character is also pretty insufferable. And there's competition between students to some degree, especially between different grades. But to some degree, or in some ways, they also have to stick together in order to survive, especially the people who are in the same class and are trying to graduate together. They have to stick together in order to survive, to get to graduation even. And Elle is not a good or nice person, which is fine, but she spends a lot of time thinking about how much worse her life is at this school because no one is willing to help her, and then is also incredibly mean to people. And it's a kind of a cycle of her being mean to people so they don't want to help her or form alliances with her, and then her complaining about how much more difficult that makes her life at the school. And she very much has reasons for approaching the school and what she wants to do after the way that she does. So there are some things about her point of view that are understandable, but you learn more about that later on in the book as things kind of develop. And so especially towards the first half in particular of the book, you don't particularly understand why she is so mean, and then also complaining about how difficult that makes her life. You're like, to some degree you have to cooperate and be willing to help other people so that they will help you, and that's how you survive. And so part of the time you're just yelling at the main character of just be a little bit nicer and help people, and they might be willing to help you. And so it was frustrating to be in her head a lot of the book, and it definitely very much felt like a setup book of just an entire book to explain this world, and then maybe you'll get to some more things later. So she's a junior at this school during the first book, and so I'm guessing the second book is going to be her senior year, which can definitely be interesting. I think there's potential for this series to be more interesting than it was in the first book. Well, it was definitely interesting. There were parts of it that were definitely interesting, but it was hard to slog through. So I'm hoping that future books might be less of a slog to get through, and that we can kind of get to some more of the action now that we have at least some grounding in the world. I also found the book kind of repetitive because they're exploring different aspects of the world and different creatures. So, to some degree there are some different things that need to tap in to kind of get a full sense of some different things about the world. But there were quite a few things that I also found pretty repetitive throughout the book. It was a little bit frustrating. So we'll see. I did, though, find really interesting, I think, the enclaves that are talked about, and one of the reasons that Elle is very reluctant to be nice to kids who are kind of promised to an enclave if they survive graduation, or who kind of kowtow to kids who might be able to help them with their position. One of the reasons she really doesn't want to be nice to them, and one of the reasons she hates the system that the school helps set up, and so one of the reasons she hates it so much is that part of it is based on your privilege of where you were born or who you were born to, and how much power they have, how much protection they have. So if you were born to parents who are in an enclave, you are in a much better position not only to get into the school and kind of learn some things that will kind of help you continue the protection that enclave represents, or the protection that enclave can give to you and your family. It's difficult for kids who are not born in those positions to actually be able to make it into the school. They get some additional help, so they're in a better position even in the school to make life easier for them while they're at school than it is for other students, and they're able to kind of make other students kind of do the dirty work for them because they can potentially, or the students who are in a worse position can maybe do some of that shitty grunt work in order to maybe get a position in one of these enclaves and get that protection. And so Ella's very pissed off at this system because she was not born into a group that can help protect her. And so, you know, it's very understandable. And I think will be an interesting source of continued discussion throughout the rest of the series. And that I'm interested to see where that discussion goes. And as I said, I think there's potential for, after a world is set up, for there to be more to explore or more action that can kind of happen. So I'm going to read the next one in the series, I think, to see where it goes. But there definitely were some frustrations or some things that I didn't like about this first book. But it is just an intriguing world. Anyway, super mixed feelings. But I'm gonna stop talking about that one now. But the other thing that I am now turning to, well, not now turning to, I've been very, very slowly getting through a little bit of the Iron Jackal, but now that all of my library books basically, I've listened to all of the library books and returned them, so I don't have anything out on Libby at the moment, so I can kind of focus more on Iron Jackal and not worry about not being able to listen to something before I need to return it. So I've been focusing more on the Iron Jackal. I'm about half-ish way through, maybe a little bit more than halfway through the Iron Jackal. And this is, again, the third book in the Caddy Jay series. This is Space Pirate series that I absolutely adore. So I'm having a ton of fun with this one, as per usual. The characters are just so much fun to follow, and the shenanigans they get into is just super entertaining to me. So I'm really enjoying this one so far. So I'm really just going to focus most of my reading time on this. I do have the audiobook, as I mentioned, so I'm mostly following along as I'm reading physically, but there have been times where I've only been listening. But I'm going to focus my reading time on this, I think, and not start another audiobook. I thought about starting either Warbreaker or the third book in the Ember and the Ashes series, but I think I'm just going to wait and just focus on this and then see what I feel like doing once I get through this one. So that is the update so far, and I will let you know how the rest of my reading week goes. Good morning, it is Monday, November 16th, so here to wrap up this past week's reading vlog. Had a good reading week overall, some mixed feelings about A Deadly Education, but there was still quite a bit about that I really enjoyed. I also did end up finishing The Iron Jackal by Chris Whitting, so I finished this on Saturday. And had such a good time with this one. This might be my favorite in the series so far. But these are all just super fun. So this is a Space Pirates story or series, and this is the third one in the Caddy Jay series, and it follows the crew of the Caddy Jay, and it's just kind of a ragtag crew that, you know, is kind of a found family, and their adventures. And their adventures usually involve the captain making some sort of poor decision and then everyone else trying to help him out of it. That's what happened in this one. Anyway, it was fun. It was, you know, another just entertaining installment, and I love this crew. I love spending time with this crew. These are just such, you know, they're pretty fast-paced, just fun, plot-based, you know, stories, but you still actually really get to know and love the characters as well. I think there's a good balance of plot and character development in these. And so, yeah, a lot of the characters are, yeah, pretty complex characters that you get to know over the course of the series. And they do have one overarching story in each of the books that wraps up in that book, but there still are threads that pull through the entire series and stuff in each of the subsequent books that make it such that you should probably read them in order if you want to read this series, but they do contain one overall story for a book that wraps up. So in this one, as I said, the captain kind of makes a poor decision and spends the rest of the book with his crew trying to make up for it. It involves cursed objects flying all over to try to fix this curse. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. There's really not much more to say about that series. It's fun. The characters are great. It's entertaining. So after I finished the Iron Jackal, I then picked up Incendiary by Zoraida Cordova. I just have the dust jacket off, and I am almost halfway through this, and I just started this on Sunday morning. So I'm having such a good time with this one. I'll talk about it more in next week's vlog. But it follows, kind of a classic fantasy setup. There's a kingdom who wants to get all of the people with magic and kind of target people with magic. And there's a rebellion, a resistance. You follow a girl who was taken from her home and taken to the palace and used for her magic. So they still kept a small number of people in the palace who could use magic as a way to help them target other people with magic and kill them, or get more information to kind of help the kingdom run and target the resistance and target the rebellion. She's actually eventually rescued by the rebellion, but needs to kind of go back undercover in the palace. And it's been so much fun so far. I really love the writing. I just was immediately sucked into the story. So I'll talk more about the second half of this and kind of my overall thoughts about that one in next week's vlog. But yeah, that was this week's reading. So overall, super fun reading week. And yeah, let me know if you've read any of these or what you think about the books that I've read. If you have read them or are excited to read them now. And thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more bookish content. I'll leave my Instagram and Twitter linked down below. That's where I like to hang out. I'll leave more resources about how you can support the Black Lives Matter movement, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.